Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me today. I'm Jesse Smith with McElroy Manufacturing. Clearly, INFUSION this year has been a vastly different experience, as have a lot of things in 2020. The theme of perseverance hits home for so many of us, both professionally and personally. There does, however, seem to be an underlying theme that's been hard not to notice, both in our daily lives and here at INFUSION2020, and that is technology. We're using technology to do things that many of us, including myself, never thought possible. It's no different here at McElroy. By now, you have seen or will see that we're introducing some really big technological advancements to the pipe fusion industry this year. And in this session, we'll be learning about one of those new technologies. Now, this may not be as big of an earth-shattering, industry-shaking development as the I-Series, but for some of us, it may just be the technology that we've been looking for to solve what can be a painful problem, and that is how to document pressure testing of piping systems. There's a new way to document, store, and analyze pressure tests. But before we get too far into the new technology, let's talk a little bit about what this looks like today. I'd like to start by simply identifying a few basic points about pressure testing in general. So we're going to take a look at what a pressure test is and how testing is done, as well as familiarize ourselves with a few of the testing standards that are commonly used. We're also going to outline a few reasons why testing is necessary and what some of the industry trends and requirements that make it such an important part of the pipeline construction process are. But most importantly, we'll look at how documentation is done today, or in some cases maybe not done, and hopefully that's not you, but we're also going to look at how we can improve and change with some new technology. So let's talk about what pressure testing is and what types of tests are performed. And there's a couple different methods that are commonly used. One is a hydrostatic test, which is a liquid pressure test that requires the pipeline to be filled with water or another testing liquid, testing medium, and purged of air before pressurization can happen. And this type of test, if done properly, is very effective and safe because it minimizes the risk of a blowout in the event of some type of failure. A pneumatic gas pressure test is a gas test that uses air or another gas testing medium. And most manufacturer procedures recommend using a pneumatic test in circumstances where a hydrostatic test is not possible for some reason, such as the inability to fill the line or purge air from the line. And this is mostly due to the higher safety factor that you get when performing a hydrostatic test. Now, gases are compressible, and large energy discharge could occur in any case where there's a failure in a high-pressure system. In cases like this, we need to make sure that all safety precautions are being followed during the test. Now, there are a few standards available for both types of tests through ASTM, ISO, and others. Many pipe manufacturers have their own procedures that are specific to their products, and those may differ slightly, so be aware that those exist. And some system owners also have their own requirements, such as a water or gas utility. These procedures, when followed, provide a safe and effective way to test piping systems. I said when followed. In some cases, these procedures are oversimplified or shortcuts are taken due to a misunderstanding of the process or maybe some type of challenge that presents itself to the installer who's required to perform the test. So what about the test itself? How does that work? It's pretty simple. Essentially, we're using some type of pump or compressor to build pressure in the line up to a specified amount, and then holding that pressure for a specified amount of time while monitoring for leaks or pressure drops. And those pressure drops would indicate a leak. Now, there are some intricacies to the test that differ depending on the type of test, procedure, or material being used. For example, some tests require cycling of the pressure in the line to simulate expected surge or other things of that nature. But at its core, it is pressure it up, monitor it for leaks, hold the line under pressure over a period of time. So now that we have a basic understanding of what pressure testing is, let's talk a little bit about why we do it. Why is pressure testing necessary? And there are several reasons. The most obvious one is that we need to make sure that the pipe that we just put together doesn't leak. Post-construction testing prior to burial or turning the system on is the primary method used for system acceptance in the industry today. We hear it all the time, especially in cases where something has maybe been called into question. Did it pass the pressure test? That's the question that gets asked. And the answer to that question is often used to make a decision that could have a major impact to the installer, the owner, or any other parties involved. It does carry a lot of weight. What about warranty? And this may apply more to those of you in the PPR side of the industry, because all the major PPR or PPR-CT manufacturers offer a significant warranty on their products. And those warranties will not be provided unless a documented pressure test that is performed per their procedure has been submitted. And in some cases, fusion records, inspection records, those may be required as well. There are potentially millions of dollars hanging in the balance, and the direction that those dollars fall could very well depend on a properly performed pressure test. So again, that pressure test carries a lot of weight. Then the last point that I'd like to make about the importance of pressure testing is centered around something that you may have heard of referred to as integrity management. And some pipeline operators, particularly those who fall under the regulations of PHMSA, so yes, I'm talking to the natural gas folks now, you may be required to do a periodic system integrity assessment, and those assessments are intended to determine whether a potentially hazardous material carrying pipeline has adequate strength or integrity to prevent leaks or ruptures. And a pressure test is one of the ways that that assessment can be accomplished. One other method that I know is happening in some areas is a rolling physical inspection of the piping system. In other words, we're digging up sections of perfectly operational pipeline to physically inspect fusion joints and other components in that system. That sounds expensive, right? Yeah, and it probably is. In this instance, a properly performed documented pressure test could save the utility a lot of time and money in trying to meet that federal requirement, not to mention provide an easier way to ensure continued safe operation of the pipeline. And yet again, the pressure test is carrying a lot of weight. Now, at this point, I'd like to just do a little bit of a review for what we've covered so far. A pressure test, what is it? It's a non-destructive leak test. And it is something that is used heavily, almost exclusively in industry, as system acceptance, warranty approval, and then add in that system integrity maintenance, and it's something that carries a lot of weight. And unfortunately, some of these procedures can be misunderstood. And there are several procedures out there, and one thing that all those procedures have in common is a generic set of data that has to be recorded. Specific set of stuff that we need to keep track of during these tests. So I'd like to go a little bit into what that data is. So the first thing that we'll talk about when it comes to data is who. We need to know who performed the test. We need to know who performed the inspection and the installation. Those are all points that we want to capture when we're doing a pressure test and trying to properly document that test. The next thing we'll look at is what. What test was performed? What material was used in the piping system that we're testing? What temperature and pressure is that material rated for? And lastly, maybe most importantly, what are the results of that test? And then when? When was the test performed? What was the duration of the test? What were the conditions at the time that test was being done? All important points that we need to capture when documenting a pressure test. How about where? Where in the piping system that we built was this test performed? And this might apply more to the polypropylene folks than anybody else, because often you're working in multi-story buildings, a lot of rooms, a lot of different sections to that system. And you need to be able to tie a record of a test to a specific part of that piping system. And in some cases, in underground work, maybe you fuse together a section, pressure test it, and then move it into its final resting place. And we need to, again, be able to tie a pressure test record to that physical, actual pipeline that we created. How do we do that now? Okay. And how? How are these records kept? what are we doing with the checklist that we're filling out? Are we signing off on documents that guarantee that the test was done correctly? How do we know if these tests were performed properly? Think about that. How do you know now? And at this point, hopefully you're asking yourself, why am I still documenting these tests this way? Maybe surely with all the technology that we have today, there's got to be a fast, safe, easy, and accurate way to document pressure tests. Until recently, the answer to that question might have been no, but that's about to change. With the introduction of pressure testing software that uses proven DataLogger 6 and now DataLogger 7 platforms, we can now capture all of the critical data required, as well as for the first time provide live pressure graph accurate to the PSI during the test. But that's not all. What about how to store and analyze that data? When paired with the McElroy Vault, you'll have a secure way to easily store, analyze, and share all the data captured during the test. So let's take a look at how all that works. Now, first, I want to be clear that this software is only available with DataLogger 6 and now DataLogger 7. So if you're a current DataLogger 6 user, all you need to do is ensure that your DataLogger has been updated to the latest version of the software and you already have access. When DataLogger 7s begin to show up on your jobs, they will already have the correct software version installed, but it's a good idea to make sure that they're kept up to date on a regular basis so that you will have access to the latest features across all the capabilities of DataLogger. So as far as setup and tooling, how do we set these up? We set them up the same way that we've been doing it in the past. Not much changes here. You're going to use the same types of valves and connection methods as you are now, as well as the same pressurization equipment. There's only one additional piece of hardware that's going to be required to use the data for documentation, and that is a way to connect the transducer. Now, this is the same transducer and quick connect used to hook up to a piece of hydraulic fusion equipment, but you will need a way to plumb the quick connect to the section of pipe being tested. And we're providing a plumbing kit that will include the quick connect and fittings required for this purpose. And those will be available through a macro distributor. With proper hardware in place, simply connect the DataLogger in the same manner that you would if you were connecting to a piece of hydraulic fusion equipment. Again, no changes need to be made to the DataLogger, the cable, or the transducer on the 6 or 7 in order to use the pressure test software. Just the additional quick connect and plumbing. So now that we have an understanding of what's required for setup and tooling and what you'll need to do to get started, let's talk a little bit about how to actually set up a pressure test within the DataLogger software. The screen may look familiar to you. This is the generic start screen for a DataLogger, whether you're going to make a pipe fusion or a pressure test. So we're going to press the start button. Now, this may look a little bit different, and the big difference here is this process type button. This is a button you're going to push and decide what process you're going to do. So you're going to select from the list a pressure test. Once that's selected, we'll start entering information about the job. Project name, installer, additional installers. These are all manually entered fields. These can be whatever you want. So on a project name, that needs to be something that you'll recognize because that's one of the ways that we'll be able to sort data later. Primary installers, who did it? Additional installers, anybody who helped. Again, these can be whatever you want them to be. The next screen, we're going to decide which testing specification we're using. And I've entered ASTM F2164-13 hydrostatic test. You'll select that from a list as well. So we have pneumatic, we have an ISO test, and then we have the ability to add in, if you have a pipe-specific or utility-specific procedure that you'd like to see, you can let us know, and we may be able to add that into the software to make it specific to you. Okay. Now we're going to start entering details about the job. And here you have building details, owner-manager, stories, floors, project type, applications. And some of those headers may feel like they're specific to polypropylene, and at design they probably are, but they're manually entered fields. So as you can see in the example, I've used building details as a way to say I'm doing an underground job for the city of New York City. There's no stories or floors because it's an underground job. It's a pressurized water main for potable water. Again, manually entered fields. You can enter whatever you need to enter to make it correct for the job that you're doing. Okay. Then we're going to talk about installation details. And on this screen, we're looking at entering system operating pressure and temperature. And in some pressure test standards, those can decide how much pressure we need to run during our pressure test and for how long, and what we should see that might indicate a pass or a fail. So we need to be very specific about the information that's entered here. We're also asking a couple of questions. Is there copper in the system? Does the system contain domestic hot water recirculating line? And those are specific to polypropylene applications and may have an impact on what we should see on a pressure test. So we're just documenting those things if they do exist. Okay. And now we're going to look at weather conditions. These are ambient conditions at the time the test is being performed. Again, the pipe temperature and ambient temperature can affect the outcome of a pressure test or what pressure we might run that test. So we want to make sure that we document that as well. We obviously need to know what type of pipe and what size the pipe we're testing is. So here's where we're going to enter that information. We also have the ability to use that traceability button, to use the barcode scanner to bring in even more information about the pipe being tested. Once we have all this information documented, our test record is completely set up and ready for us to run the test. All we have to do now is press the Start Pressure Test button. When you press that button, you will run the test according to the procedure as you always have. The difference now is there's no more watching a pressure gauge. You're watching the data logger where you have a to the PSI digital readout, and you're going to start to see that pressure graph start to develop. And now you will be able to monitor what the pressure is actually doing over time in real time, all while capturing this information. Once the test is complete, you're going to get a report, and that report is going to consist of all the information that you entered, as well as the summary of what happened during the test. And this is where we can look at a pressure graph and start to do some analysis. We can see if the cycle times were correct. We can see if the correct pressures were maintained. And if you have any pressure drop, you'll be able to see that very clearly as well. And this is something that nobody's ever been able to provide for pressure testing before. So what do I do with all this data? Now that I've created this extensive report for this pressure test, what do I do with it? Now I can move it to the vault and store it securely. And there's a couple different ways to do that. If you have Wi-Fi connectivity, you can move that to the vault instantly. All you have to do is log into your vault account, username and password on the device. If you have that connectivity, as soon as the record is created, it is instantly moved into the vault for safekeeping. If you don't have that connectivity, there's a couple ways to do it manually. We can export that record to an external storage device, a USB flash drive, and then transfer it manually over to your laptop and then into the vault. You also have the ability to export it to a folder that can be attached to an email and then sent out wherever it needs to go. So you've got some different options on how to manage the report data. Once you have one of these records into the vault, it is in a secure place that only those that need access to it have access to it. This is all run on an Amazon Web Services server. It's the same stuff that the U.S. military uses for a lot of their data storage. So it's as safe as it's going to get. One of the best tools that you get out of the vault is a way to do detailed analysis. And there's an example on the screen here of what that might look like. You can actually look at a specific section of that graph and see what the exact pressure was at a given point in time, and then look at what pressure loss might have been over a specific period of time. So it's a new window into looking at these pressure tests in a very detailed way that we have not ever had before. One other really good feature within the vault that makes our life a little bit easier is sharing data. And this is something I like to do a little scenario with. Imagine you've just completed a section of pipe, and you need to pressure test it and get that signed off on so that you can bury it and move on with your project. This is one way that you can do that. As soon as I have that record created, I can share it with another user simply by sending that user essentially a friend request. I just need their username for their Vault account. Now I can share that record, they can see it, they can sign off on it, and I can go on about my job. When I don't want them to see it anymore, all I have to do is remove them, and now I have that record still secure, still safe, and I only have access to it. There are some other features that help with this as well, such as the ability to create sub-accounts so that different contractors can have sub-accounts that all channel into a master account, so an inspector or an owner can see that data, but nobody else can. So lots of features for analysis and sharing here that are really beneficial to us. Now that you've seen how all this works, I think you're probably asking yourself, how do I get into this? And there's some different ways to do that we'll talk about in just a minute. But before we go down that road, there's a few more points I want to make. So I'd like you to consider a few things. Imagine your next project that you have the ability to capture and store a record of every single fusion that is done on that job, including electrofusions. Any additional system components that get installed, such as valves or any kind of special fittings that get installed, you can capture that. Any external processes that happen, such as squeeze-offs, we now have the ability to capture those. Any destructive tests that you may have done for operator qualification, those can be captured. And of course, the extensive data that we've just covered as it pertains to pressure tests. All of these records are going to be securely stored and easily accessed. They're permanently stored with no paperwork. Every single record has been reviewed and accepted without any paper data transfer. Everything is sorted and filed in a way that makes the most sense to the people that need access to it. The records are easily accessed instantly, as well as shared with any third parties that have a need temporarily or permanently for that visibility. So how do you get to this point? This may sound like a pipe dream, but there are users out there that are doing this right now. You can just go listen to the guys over at Fusion Technologies in their breakout session, and you'll see that it can be done. But how are you going to get there, specifically with pressure testing? It's not going to be done through the old standard checklist, signed and dated, that doesn't offer much more than a take my word for it agreement that a proper test was completed. It's probably not going to be done with handwritten daily journals of what took place on that job being faxed back to the home office. That's probably not going to get you there. The new features built into the data logger are going to make it easier than ever before to ensure that all the data required is captured, and the McElroy Vault is going to ensure that the data is safe, permanent, and easily accessed. That's how you're going to get there. And it can look like this. Everything in one place, sorted, filed in a way that makes sense to you. So I'd like to end today with a little bit of a challenge. If you found yourself asking why, now I want you to ask yourself, why not?
All right, everybody. Looks like we're live and ready to start taking your questions. I've got Shannon Land, the famous Shannon Land, with us today. He's going to be helping me take some of these questions and get all those answered for you. So, Shannon, what do we got?
All right. Thank you, Jesse. Great presentation, by the way. Look forward to seeing what kind of questions we're getting this afternoon. So we'll go ahead and kick things off here. So one of the things I know you talked about was hydrostatic pressure testing and pneumatic pressure testing. And it kind of looked like a lot of the times you would be hydrostatic testing, but maybe you can go into some of those reasons why you would not use hydrostatic testing and maybe prefer pneumatic.
Yeah, you know, there's reasons why you would choose one over the other. As I talked about in the presentation, there's a little bit of a safety factor advantage with the hydrostatic test. If you happen to be listening to Jim and his last presentation, he went into a little bit more detail about how that pneumatic test can present some safety issues. A compressed gas, when it does create a failure, can create a bit of an explosive effect, which is not good. So as far as reasons why you might go with a pneumatic over a hydrostatic, it really boils down to if you cannot do a hydrostatic test for some reason, and maybe you can't fill the pipe due to some design issue. You may have components in the piping system that aren't compatible with the liquid. You may damage those components, or they may not allow liquid to pass through small orifices or things like that. If you're going to fill the pipe and now you have no way to get the water back out of the pipe, one of the examples that comes to mind is if you bore under a road or under a creek or something like that, now you've got this big U-shaped pipe. How are you going to get that water out of that bottom section? So things like that you need to consider. Now, there are also, industries that run gas, natural gas through the pipe. And usually we're going to see a pneumatic test of some kind in the natural gas industry, because that's more, it's closer to what they're actually going to be using in that pipe system. And again, there are components that are sensitive to water and things of that nature in that system as well.
And a lot of times when you're dealing on the natural gas side, you're probably going to be dealing at lower pressures as well, right?
Yeah, but much lower pressures, and then the single digits, usually, very low pressures we're talking about there. And unless it's gas transmission, you have higher pressures, then we're talking about potentially, maybe even a different material that you're running that pressure test on. Use what makes sense, use what's safe. And if you're doing that pneumatic test, just make sure that you have taken all the necessary safety precautions and that you know exactly what you're doing and dealing with, so that you don't wind up with a safety issue.
I think that's sound advice, Jesse. I think that's sound advice. All right. So another thing that you talked about, which I think is going to be huge, is being able to, of course, not just record the pressure test, but to be able to store those in the vault. So is there any price that's going to be associated with using that vault, or even using the software for that matter?
No. Now, there's a cost to get started up with a data logger. The data logger itself, the data logger kit's going to have a cost. We talked about that in the main stage presentations yesterday. But the vault itself, since the vault has been around, has not had a charge associated with it. It's always been free. And so that's one of the benefits of using this system, is you don't have to pay some kind of annual or monthly service charge or membership fee to have access to that. Now, one of the things that I mentioned in the presentation was, if you already are using DataLogger 6, you don't need to do anything to start using this software. All you need to do is make sure that you have the latest version downloaded, and that software is already there. The reality is that the ability to do these pressure tests has been around for quite some time. It's just something that we now are catching up with on the documentation side, that we have the ability to actually capture it and put it into a format that is readable and makes sense to whoever's looking at it. Now, what we've been doing with data loggers since data loggers were a thing is measuring pressure over time. That's what you're doing in a pressure test. Doesn't matter if it's air, water, hydraulic fluid. It's something that we know works because we've been doing it for 25 years. We just now have the technology and the software on the back end to be able to capture it and store it and make it make sense.
Perfect. And the nice thing is that you can use the data logger for pretty much everything.
Yeah, that's definitely been a theme this year with technology and where we're going with DataLogger and iSeries. It really is all integrated and it all ties together.
That's right. So when people do order these new DL7s, is all that stuff going to be preloaded on there?
Yes, when the DL7s start rolling out, they will leave with whatever the latest version of software is at that time. And we're going to be 2 or 3 versions past where we are now, which is where the pressure test software exists. And we're working on quarterly rollouts at this point, I believe, to keep those updates going. So you may see changes to that software. We may have additions to it. We may be able to add in new standards, new materials. As those things change, we're really trying to stay out in front of what that software looks like. Same thing with the Vault. If there are new pieces of information that we need to be able to display or view in the Vault, those changes will get made as those software updates come out.
Perfect. Now, if I'm currently using a DL6 and I'm doing pressure tests, when I get my DL7s, is it going to look the same?
There'd be, very little difference between the two. That's one of the things that I know during the design and the switch to the DL7. We had so much success with the DL6 and that platform that we really wanted to try to keep it as close to the DL6 as possible. So the operating system staying with the Android and going to the Android 9, you may see some slight variation because of that new operating system, but the buttons are the same, the functionality is the same. There really shouldn't be any kind of a learning curve that you'd need to go through when switching to the DataLogger 7, because it is, again, the same operating system, just a newer version. So think about like when you get a new, if you're an iPhone user, you get a new iOS rollout a couple times a year. It doesn't take you very long to get used to those changes. It happens pretty quick.
No, not at all. Now, I know with the current model, the DL6, in order to be able to do the pressure tests, you've got to order a kit. Is that kit that we can currently order? Is that the same one we'll use for the 7?
Yeah, kit is the same. You have just some plumbing. There's a T, a 90, the connection, the quick connect for the pressure transducer. That's all in that kit. It's available now. It's pretty minimal cost. That's the only cost you'll have associated with getting involved in doing these pressure tests.
All right, and you wouldn't by any chance off the top of your head know that part number, would you?
I wish I didn't have a memory that I do sometimes. ADL 6001.
Look at that, folks. He's got it right there at the top of his head.
The list cost on this is right around $100. It's like $93 and change, so it's not a huge expense to get going on it.
And I know you and I have installed a few of those kits, and it comes with basically every type of fitting you could imagine in order to hook it up, so it shouldn't be too hard.
There's a lot of variability on the way that the pressure transducer can be plumbed in and adapted to the system that you're using to do that pressure test. So, these are just common standard fittings, and you don't necessarily even have to use the kit that we send you, but you do have to have that DataLogger quick
step. One piece.
Yeah, if you wanted to plumb your own and just have that DataLogger quick disconnect, you can do that as well. Again, there is a lot of variability in the ways that this can be attached to do that pressure test.
All right, so one of the questions that just came in is, can we print these pressure test results? Can we email them out? What's the best way?
Yeah, so there's some variability to this, and it depends on whether you're using the Vault and all of its features, or if you're doing it through the viewing software that you may be familiar with. But essentially, you get all the same tools that you've had with DataLogger joint reports and the Vault that you've always had. So once a record is in the Vault, you have some options on what you can do with it. You can print it out as a PDF, you can save that file, and you can email that actual data file to somebody, and then they can look at it through our joint report viewing software, where you won't have all the same tools that you would in the Vault for analysis, but you still can see it and you can store that data file.
Okay.
If you're a Vault user, you still have access to that same data file, the report viewing software, but you don't have all the analysis tools. You don't have the ability to share that record with somebody else and then take it back, like I talked about in the presentation. So multiple ways that you can do that.
And if somebody was a brand new user, had never used a DataLogger before, how hard is it going to be to set up a Vault account and go through that process?
Setting up a vault account is super easy. You know, it's as simple as creating a username and password and entering an email address, and your vault account is set up. Again, like we said, doesn't cost anything. You know, once that username and password is set up, you have access to all the features of the vault. You know, then it just becomes a matter of playing around in there a little bit, and looking at how you want to set your preferences so that it'll do what you want it to do. Of course, you know, we can always help with that. We have, it's something that we train on a little bit in our operator courses and things like that. So a simple phone call to either us or you know, somebody at one of our channel partners who's familiar, we'll get you set up with a vault account very, very easily. And within a few minutes have you ready to roll on that. But one thing I want to point out is that you know, not everybody needs to have a vault account. That might sound counterproductive for us, but we really need to think about who needs to have access to that data. You know, if I am the contractor who's doing the work on a job, I may not be the person who needs to own and have that data forever. So that data may be better off in the owner of that system's vault account, or maybe the engineering firm that designed the system, something of that nature. It's most likely not the person who's actually just fusing the pipe that needs to have that vault account, or the person who's doing that test needs to have that vault account. It might be a higher level. So there's something to consider there. You know, have a plan on who needs to have access, and there are some features in the vault that can help with that, like sub accounts and the sharing feature.
Okay. And if they just wanted to print or download straight to a computer and just print it out the old-fashioned way, we can still do that, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. You've still got to put it into a format that you know, a computer can read and understand. So, you know, one of the things that I showed you in that presentation was you have the ability to take that joint report file, put it on a storage device, move it to your computer. But if you put that file on your computer is not going to know what to do with it. So you have to use that viewing software or the vault to create that PDF file that you can print out and store in a filing cabinet if you want to.
Perfect. Now, when it comes to doing these pressure tests, Jesse, does it matter what size pipe it is?
No. Anything, and for that matter, it doesn't matter what material it is. This is a system to do a pressure test on anything that is going to be a pressure vessel. So any pipe size that you can plumb the transducer into, if you have a way to put a test cap or an end cap on it to create pressure in it, then you can do a pressure test on it. So this is not limited just to the portion of your job that it is in, you know, plastic fusible pipe. If you have multiple materials on the same job, you can pressure test all of it using this software. So it really is a pretty good.
So you're saying if I've got a 600-pound steel line, I can pressure test that digitally with the DataLogger?
I mean, the only limitation there is you've got to stay within the limitations of what the transducer can handle. These are 3,000 PSI transducers. So if you're doing a pressure test at higher than 3,000 PSI, you're maxed out.
That typically could be a game changer, because a lot of our contractors that are out there are installing not just HDPE, but they're installing PVC, they're installing steel, cast, ductile, all kinds of different stuff.
Right.
That could definitely be huge. So
it really is a pretty big deal to be able to capture all that information in a way that we've never been able to do it before. You know, I hope the presentation didn't sound a little bit harsh by kind of knocking on the old school way of having a signed agreement, you know, but in a lot of cases, we're finding that these pressure tests aren't being witnessed by the people who really have a lot at stake by the outcome of that test. And that's not to say that anybody would ever be dishonest, but that really is kind of a handshake agreement. And if we don't see it happen, we don't know what happened. So this is a way to make sure we do know what happened during that test.
And as far as I know you talked about some procedures that are out there and some standards that are out there. If you got questions about any of the procedures and stuff, who's the best people to contact in that?
It depends on what you're working with. You know, in a lot of cases, it's the manufacturer of the material who sets those standards and has a requirement for the way that a pressure test should be done. In those cases, you need to go to them. In some cases, we're using sort of industry standard procedures, and it may be, you know, somebody from the organization that wrote that standard. It may be just an industry expert. We're always willing to help. And then, of course, there are lots of folks that do consulting type work that are very familiar with the way that these standards. Well, I should say that they're familiar with the reason these standards are the way that they are. And if you see issues or have concern about running a standard on a certain product, they'll be able to help with that as well. McElroy is, we're making the equipment, and we're working, on making the technology to do these types of things better and better all the time. And this is a case where we're stepping out of our comfort zone a little bit, and we're opening up the technology to be used for things that we may not necessarily be the industry experts on. So, go back to that manufacturer of the material, back to that industry expert for that standard, and we will be right there with you every step of the way, and making sure that our technology and our equipment is able to meet those needs.
Perfect. And that works out very well for us to go ahead and throw out a plug to our sponsors.
Yeah.
On our page, on the main Infusion page up at the top, on the left-hand side, you'll see, I should be able to see the shared screen I've got, but under sponsors, if you'll click on that, you can see all the different sponsors that we have for our event here. And these are virtually live booths that you can go in and have conversations with. As you can see, a lot of the different folks and manufacturers out there in the industry. So if you've got questions about procedures specific to somebody's pipe or fittings or whatever the case may be, please take the time, go out, reach out to them, talk to them in their booths, and I'm betting you can probably get those questions answered. Jesse, I don't see any other questions that are coming in right now. Do you have anything you'd like to add?
Just that this is a really exciting development, and we really hope that folks kind of get on board with us and go down the road. This is just kind of the first evolution of where this is going to go. There are things being worked on as we speak that are going to change the way that the data logger is used throughout the industry. I mean, the iSeries is a good example of that. If you listen to Mike Pacheco's DataLogger 7 presentation, he talked about some of the different ways that we're going to start using the data logger to capture things like electrofusion and manual processes and squeeze offs. Join us on that journey. It's going to be exciting, and the pressure testing part is just one piece of that. So we're excited to see what comes in the future. And as always, if you have questions, comments, or concerns that didn't get addressed here, reach out to us directly, and we'll or suggestions for that matter. Reach out to us directly, and we'll make sure those get addressed.
Yeah, we definitely like the suggestions too. A lot of our equipment that we have is because of those suggestions.
The whole theme from the beginning has been listening, right? We really try to listen to what our users are telling us, and that's how we got to where we are with the pressure testing feature. We had our folks out in the field asking for it, and that's where we're at. So. Exactly.
And I will say, if you have any additional questions today, before the end of the day, you can also check out McElroy's virtual booth, and we have that manned with people who can answer your questions at that time too. And of course, as always, we greatly appreciate you guys being here with us today at Infusion, and we greatly look forward to seeing you guys in the future, whether it be virtually or in person. And I think that's all we have for today.
All right. Well, thanks, Shannon.
All right. Thank you, Jesse. Great presentation.